Hello and welcome to the Stuhr Crazy Podcast. This is Rob Nelson.
And I'm Mike Bakoven, and we are here for Season 3, Episode 3. So, Rob, what do you call somebody who takes all their problems and sees them in other people?
That I don't know.
That's a projectionist.
Oh, God. Here we go again.
It's not the worst joke I've ever told. It's pretty close.
It's pretty close. Mike would know, though, because he did spend a little bit of time as a projectionist. And that's the reason why in the first segment of the podcast, he's going to be joining us as the special guest.
Yeah, stay tuned for that, I suppose. But yeah, we're going to talk movies. We're going to talk movie houses, and then we're going to get outside of the museum and go to the historic Grand Theater, which is just a treasure of a building in Grand Island. And we're going to talk basically all things movies, the history of theaters in Grand Island. We're going to talk about the history of the Grand in particular. And it's a neat story. So if you like movies at all, if you could use a little bit of escapism, this will do it for you.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to go all the way back to 1907, all the way up to the present. And Grand Island has a great history of movie houses, and we're going to delve deep into those stories. So stick with us, and we will start the show right after this. Hello and welcome to the Stuhr Crazy Podcast. This is Rob Nelson. Today I'm joined by my other co-host, but today he's going to be the special guest, Mike Bakoven.
Oh no, the hot seat. Here I am.
Exactly. In addition to being a movie buff, much like myself, Mike is also on the Grand Foundation Board in Grand Island, a local movie theater here. So we asked him to be on the podcast, especially for that.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm a fan of the podcast, which I think it stands to reason. So I will come at you and say, we'll put out the caveat that I am not a historian. So I'm going to try to cite my sources as much as possible when we're talking about history. But I welcome if any of this information is wrong or disputed to go ahead and email me personally and tell me how much I screwed up. Because like I said, you have a fantastic history degree from the University of Nebraska. I have no such thing. So I will see what I can do in order to muddle through.
I'm sure it'll be just fine.
All right.
Well, let's just start talking about the board that you're on. What is the mission of the Grand Foundation Board?
All right. So the Grand Foundation is unique in that it's a nonprofit organization. So it exists not to make money, but to serve the community, specifically to serve downtown Grand Island. And the thing about that, and we'll get into that when we talk to Jim Pohl, who is the kind of the director of the Grand, in a little bit in the second segment. But the thing that's interesting about that is that you see this happening a lot more in smaller communities as some of these kind of bigger movie houses are becoming no longer commercially viable. The community is stepping up and saying, we still want this in our community. We will volunteer to make it happen. And that's exactly what's happening at the Grand. And it started in 2004. So we were a little bit ahead of the curve because this big giant movie house that has existed since 1937 was in danger of just not existing anymore. And community businessmen stood up and said, we're not going to let that happen, volunteered their time, didn't just write grants, but served the popcorn and then cleaned the machines afterward. And that's kind of the mission of the Grand Foundation Board, is to make sure that this movie house continues to exist for as long as possible.
Absolutely. I think that's a great cause personally. I'm a huge movie person. I love the experience of the old movie house experience. I think that they offer something that, a huge multiplex just doesn't offer you. So I really love to see when those sorts of things continue on.
Yeah. If nothing else, it's a sense of history. I mean, the Grand doesn't do repertory stuff as in older movies that often because they just don't work. And that's a little frustrating because a lot of people will come in and say, oh, I would love to see Gone with the Wind here. Or I would love to see, whatever these old movies were. People say that and then they don't show up, which is frustrating, but we've seen it happen again and again and again. The sense of history that you get, maybe you're watching the latest, comic book movie or whatever, but there's still that history kind of surrounding you, and that's the cool part of the Grand, I think.
So there's a few questions I'd like to ask you specifically about movie theater history in Grand Island. I know you've been brushing up on the subject.
Been trying.
So Grand Island actually had quite a few movie theaters in its early history. Are there any that stand out apart to you and, in terms of their uniqueness to the story of Grand Island?
Yes. Okay. Well, citing my sources, which is the book Our Show Houses by John Sorensen, who's a friend of the Stuhr Museum. There were three kind of big theaters in Grand Island, and those were the Grand, which opened in 1937. But before then, you had the Capitol, which is kind of its own story and has its own thing, and then the Lida or the Lida. I'm still not sure how to pronounce that.
I think
but
it's Lida.
Lida. But in Sorensen's book, he's got this fantastic chapter about kind of fly-by-night movie houses that would open, around the dawn of film. So I think 1909 may have been the first movie house or something like that. But I want to read from that book for a second. It says, in the next 7 years, 7 new theaters opened. Most of these new houses were little more than hole in the walls, tawdry, unclean places out for a fast dime. Movies got a reputation at this time for being immoral, squalid dens where the sexes mingled in dangerous darkness. A movement was even started by local churches to put into effect blue laws, and then goes on to talk a little bit about that. So there were at one time, according to this book, 11 movie theaters in Grand Island, but some of them were nothing more than like, quick set up some seats and get a hand crank projector and show God knows what they're showing at that point. So, a lot of them were kind of open and closed within a year, 2 years, 5 years, whatever it was. But the big three were the Capitol, the Lida, and the Grand. And of those, only the Grand still exists.
I know a little bit about this. I think the first movie theaters in this country started during this decade as well, the 1900s. I think 1905 might have been the first year that movie theaters in America that would resemble a movie house of today came about. The first theater I found in Grand Island was actually called the Lyric Theater.
Yeah.
That opened in 1907. The Lida, soon to follow, came about in 1911. And correct me if I'm wrong, is the Lida, it became the Grand Theater much later, correct?
I think that might be the case, or part of it became the Grand. And again, someone's gonna call me on the history, but when we were talking with Jim, he had this whole big thing about how, okay, well, this was a business over here, and now it's the bathrooms, and this was, I think a lot of it gets kind of mixed together. But yeah, I think the Grand and the Lida are the same thing.
What I found, and there is a little bit of conflicting information as to the years, but I found that the Lida was opened in 1911, and it kind of stayed put until 31 when there was a rename to the Grand in 1931. And then it closed down in 1936 for a major renovation project. So I think it came back in 1937 as something completely different.
That would make sense.
So it probably didn't even resemble the original structure.
Yeah.
And the first movie that was shown there was actually A Star is Born.
That's awesome.
I found an old movie advertisement from the newspaper from Friday, May 7th, 1937, that talks about, the Grand Theater opening, and let joy be unconfined. The doors of Nebraska's finest theater swing open. Amid the luxury of the beauty we proudly present as our opening attraction, Janet Gaynor and Frederick March in A Star is Born. With this great movie poster picture. And
that's good.
The nostalgia in me is just radiant.
God, what I love about that is that the weird thing is they're not wrong. I mean, aside from maybe some churches, there were kind of no grander structures, like a church and a courthouse and then a movie theater, and it was a very different beast because you've got like neon and you've got very different kinds of building materials and architecture. And I know we're going to get into the Capitol in a minute, but just some of the stuff they did with that is just fascinating stuff. And you think back to the age before. This is still kind of the radio age. TV comes in in the late 40s, somewhere in there. I'm not sure.
In the home in the early 50s.
Early 50s, yeah. So this is still kind of like the congregation, the place where the community got together. And that's the thing that in reading Sorensen's book and in just thinking back to the history of movies, that I love about it is the idea that this isn't just a place to come and get entertainment or to throw popcorn in your face for 2 hours. It's a place where the community was the community. And that's what's so awesome about the idea. And
there was something for everybody too. I mean, this is a time when, in the 30s at least, the first full featured animation movie comes out.
Mm-hmm.
You also, prior to this time, before there was a TV in every home in America, there were newsreels that were played before movies. And, you got the news on Al Capone and John Dillinger, or, what was happening in the war overseas or stuff like that. So, I mean, it really was a place that kind of informed its audience before it entertained them.
Yeah, I just heard a thing the other day, I think it was on NPR somewhere, about how some of the first politicking via film was done via newsreel and stuff like that. It's like, that are skewing a particular way because people knew that certain types of people went to the movies to get their news from the newsreels and other people got it from the radio and they tailored it that way. I'm like, the more things change, man.
Yeah, exactly.
So
let's
cool.
talk. You mentioned the Capitol Theater. What is unique about that theater?
So again, according to the John Sorensen book, the idea was that the Capitol Theater, there's a little bit of a connection to Stuhr Museum that I think is really cool. And that is that it was funded by H.N. Bud Walbach, who of course was the chairman of the board of Stuhr Museum for 25 years, somewhere in there. I'm going to get dinged on that, but for a very long time, basically the founding fathers of Stuhr Museum was Bud Walbach, and that he was the banker who kind of spearheaded the project to get the Capitol built. And it was a certain kind of theater. There was an Australian architect who would come in and do these things where they would make it look like a starry and cloudy night outside inside the theater. We were one of the first communities of under just like 100,000 people to have a theater like this. They would put the theaters all over the place, but not in towns as small as Grand Island. And we thanks to some enterprising people, we were able to kind of get this architectural wonder.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we did. We were kind of on the same page with some of this research.
Oh, thank goodness.
What Mike's talking about was actually called an atmospheric theater. It was created by John Eberson. He created these things that, like, as Mike said, were like sort of this interior architecture through wood or, plaster, and just the way that it was constructed on the walls. It would be designed in such a way that would, a cityscape would form or an outdoor scene, like a sunset could be seen. And then using like projectors and lamps and, the depth of the architecture on the walls, you could create the sense that there was like an evening happening outdoors, and it was kind of infinite, and you weren't confined to this interior space of a box inside of a movie theater, and it was just this elaborate thing. Yeah, they were really cool.
Yeah. Well, one of the things, again, in Sorensen's book, he said that there was reported to be a sign up at the projection booth where they controlled like the stars and the clouds, that were lit up, that said, please do not turn on the clouds until the show starts. Please be sure the stars are turned off before you leave, which I thought is just kind of poetic, especially when you're talking about movies. It's like, make sure the stars are off before you leave.
Yeah, absolutely. And we were talking about just, how new this technology was. And I came across an article from, 1915, actually, where there was a movie that was going to be filmed in Grand Island for the purpose of just kind of capturing scenes from life in Grand Island. There's actually a company from St. Louis that came to town called National Cinematograph Company. They took a lot of film of different scenes in Grand Island, just including footage from the Grand Island High School, from the Elks Parade that happened to be taking place in town in 1915. And an article in the paper said it was encouraging everyone to come to the Empress Theater in downtown Grand Island to see, quote, everyone will be appearing as life-size images in these films, and the people of Grand Island will be given a chance to see themselves in motion pictures as others see them. These are the first and only motion pictures ever taken in the city. Don't miss them.
Oh, that's great. I love the idea. It's like, we're going to put you on the screen.
Exactly. And it's just, it's so innocent, and I just love it so much. It's so nostalgic.
That is. And I think I've seen snippets of that video, and I think you can see it in certain places. I think the Nebraska State Historical Society has a copy. And it really is, like, if I remember correctly, not the most exciting footage. It's like, here's some school kids lined up against a wall, and we're moving the camera, and they're looking at the camera, not quite sure what's happening, and that's really all it is.
But at the time, you're just like, look, there's little Billy.
Exactly. And
he's on TV.
And they're so excited because they've never seen anything like that before, which is amazing.
Exactly.
So the other thing I wanted to touch on, if you don't mind me jumping in, is that Grand Island had a drive-in, which I love, because I'm a little bit of a nerd, and I have been known to drive just under 1,000 miles to go to a drive-in that I really enjoy with a bunch of friends of mine from the internet. So, I mean, these things happen. But from 1949 to 1985, Grand Island had a drive-in. And again, according to Sorensen's book, one of the things that was interesting about it is they encouraged people to bring your neighbor kids, right? So they wanted people to just pile in the car and come to the drive-in. And they had like a petting zoo that they called the Grand Island Zoo that was next to the drive-in. That was basically just ducks and geese and turkeys and maybe a cow or something. It wasn't anything special, but they had a bunch of animals. So you could go and the kids could play with the animals and the adults could do whatever they're doing. And then it would get dark and you'd get your popcorn and candy and watch the movie. And I'm like, I'm sorry, a lot of people have different ideas of what heaven looks like, but that would be pretty close. I mean, that's a fantastic time right there.
You can just see some sort of showman coming up with that idea. Like,
yeah,
this is going to be great. Hear me out.
Instead of making it look like we're outside, we're actually outside.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and there is how many drive-ins are left in Nebraska that weren't jerry-rigged because of the pandemic? I think the answer is 2, but it might be 3. So this summer, I took a trip to the Starlight Drive-In in Neely, Nebraska, and it was just about as perfect as you would want it to be because we went and saw Jaws, and it was, the sky was perfect, and it was exactly what you want the drive-in to be. The center is there for the snack bar and everything else. And just, you can really see the appeal of those things and understand both why they were popular and then why they went away.
And another reason why I wanted Mike on this episode of the podcast as a special guest is he actually has quite a bit of experience inside movie theaters. Yeah. I know he takes a yearly trip to the eastern part of the United States. And I'm going to ask you and put you on the spot here.
Okay.
To talk a little bit about that, because is it a monster movie extravaganza? What you do every year?
Okay, so there is a drive-in called. It's in Vandergrift, Pennsylvania, and it's the Monsterama Super Monsterama Drive-In. They do 2 every year. One is called April Ghouls Day, and one is called Monsterama, and it's in September. And a couple friends of mine and I go to this, and they basically start when it gets dark, and they show monster movies until the sun comes up, and it's pretty great. I'm getting up in years to where it's not as great as it used to be, but they still. I mean, the snack bar. Last time we were there, it's owned by kind of an older couple, and they made borscht. I mean, it's just the kind of thing where it's like, we're going to home cook for you people who came to watch all these terrible monster movies. And it's fantastic. The drive-in is situated in this natural bowl. So in order to sneak in, you would have to like climb part of a mountain and rappel down. And in certain scenarios that I've been there, the image kind of ghosts off the early morning fog. And it's just fantastic.
That sounds right up my alley. Honestly, like I would love to see a monster movie extravaganza.
I'll send you a link. The website to the place still looks like it was made in GeoCities. It's exactly what you want. It's just a very long drive, so I'm not sure I recommend it. But I love the idea of, like I said, that community of people getting together and just being outside and experiencing the same thing together. That's what I love about it.
Well, one other question, and maybe we'll leave it here after your answer. But I know you have some experience as a projectionist. Going back in time in Lincoln, Nebraska. Would you tell us about that? Any unique circumstances come your way?
Yeah. So I was a projectionist for 2 summers while I was in high school and then in college. And the thing that was great about that is you get to see the entire swath of the movie-going public. So you see the people who don't read what the movie is about, and they take their kids to a horror movie and then have to run out because the kid is screaming. You see you find weird things at the end of the movies. Like one time we found, God, what was it? It was like a shoe, a champagne bottle, and like a fishing lure, or just like the weirdest combination of things. But my favorite, one of my favorite memories is once I was working the booth for the movie Independence Day in 1996, and it was at the State Theater in Lincoln, which is now the Rococo, which is a performing arts space, right? So it's a performing arts space, and it held 911 people, and it was pretty close to sold out. So the movie is rolling, and I get to see a jump scare because I'm up in the booth, start all the way at the beginning of the front row and roll all the way back. And it probably took about 2 seconds, but it was a fantastic 2 seconds because you wouldn't think of it as like an energy wave, but that's kind of exactly what it was. You whoa, 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 like that. And that's one of the things when we talked to Jim Pohl at the Grand is that so many of these were also performing spaces, but the Grand is a movie house. And that's one of the things that I think is special about it is it's just made for movies, and it's not made for live performance. It's not made for, theater. It's a movie space. And that's pretty cool.
Well, we're going to leave it there. We will take a break. We'll be back with Jim Pohl of the Grand Theater in Grand Island, Nebraska. Stay with us.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Eastern Bay Trading Company. For that unique and unusual goods, see the Eastern Bay Trading Company, agent Herr Schneckel in Grand Island on South Front Street. Goods are imported from around the world at the most reasonable rates.
Welcome to the Stuhr Crazy Podcast. As always, I'm Rob Nelson.
And I'm Mike Bakoven, and we are here with, what's your title, Jim?
Manager.
Manager of the Grand Theater, Jim Pohl. Welcome.
We are live on location at the Grand Theater here in downtown Grand Island to speak about all things history of this theater.
You can hear the glow of the neon, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Jim, thanks for being on the show.
Sure. Thank you.
Let's talk about the history of the Grand Theater. Kind of where did it all begin? What was it originally called? Any of that kind of stuff? I'd love to hear it myself.
Okay, in 1926, it was called the Lyda Theater. It was half the size of what it is right now.
This is back during like the single screen days, right?
Right. Yeah. It was just a very small theater. They showed silent movies. They didn't run sound, even though all the other theaters in town were doing that.
Did they have like an orchestra pit? Was it like live?
I don't think it was anything quite that sophisticated.
Yeah,
they might have had a piano or something. But anyway, they ran, I think, until like 1930, 1931, and a couple of businessmen bought the Lyda and remodeled it and turned it into the Grand. It was still half the size it is now, but it was more updated and everything else. It ran like that for a while, and then in 1937 is when they did the big major remodel and made it to what we're all familiar with.
1937 is when the Grand became the Grand.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, cool.
What was the first movie that played in 1937?
It was A Star is Born.
I think that speaks to like the nostalgia of movie theaters. I know like right when we were getting here, Jim was saying that, given the situation we're all experiencing right now, that people are comforted by the movie going experience. And I mean, that's pretty cool that it was A Star is Born. And that movie was just remade for the umpteenth time again a few years ago and still a fan favorite.
Yeah, it was kind of fun because there's all kinds of photographs out there. If you visit the Stuhr Museum, they've got a fantastic archive. But Jack Bailey took hundreds of photos during the grand opening. And so what we did when we ran A Star is Born, we pretty much put exactly what was up on the marquee back in 1937 when the Grand opened.
Yeah, no, you do a lot of the pre-show stuff too when the Grand was running. So did you like make a pre-show for that one? Or?
Yeah, I did. We did a couple Popeye cartoons.
That's right.
It was in it was whatever was in public domain that I could find. So, but
I think that's a really interesting aspect of the history of movies. I actually looked up what the first feature animated film was. There's always the cartoons like Popeye or Felix the Cat or whatever. But do either of you know the first feature film that was entirely animation?
That was Snow White, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. All right.
Yeah.
Steal my thunder. That's fine.
Yeah.
But
you're talking to movie guys.
Yeah.
So we might know that.
But I found it interesting that it was actually in 1937, the year that the Grand became the Grand. So we're tying into that kind of time period.
It's crazy.
Do you think there's a comparison to be made between, this is going to be a stretch, but I love spinning these yarns between, you said that this was a theater that showed silent movies and that there were other places around town that were doing the talkies and had sound and things like that. Do you think there's a connective tissue there between that, division and today where you have like the Sundance movies and the independent films and like your big blockbuster Avengers type movies that spend $100 million?
I think the thread that I would spin between them is the need for stories and the need for escape, like both. I mean, it's not a accident. I think that movie theaters are dark. I think it's important just for people in general to kind of have that. And I'm going to sound lofty and stupid, and I'm sorry in advance, but to have that dream state, right? And that's the thing I love about movies that you don't get at your house unless you unless you really turn off the lights and take your phone and put it down and do these things, is that existing in someone else's shared, imagined space for a certain amount of time. I think that is elemental. Am I wrong?
No. I think the one thing that I have missed more than anything in the last few months is being able to go see a movie. And like you said, sitting at home, it's too easy to hit the pause button. It's too easy to, get distracted. I don't know. I really miss just sitting and watching a movie.
Yeah.
I just think that there's something like Mike said, elemental about going and seeing a movie in a way that there aren't very many other things like it. I mean, how many things do you have in common with, a family from 1905? But going to a movie as a family is one of those. And I don't think you could name 5 other ones to fill out the hand. Maybe you could, but not off the top of your head anyway.
Yeah, food, shelter.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Christmas.
Beyond staying alive, then go from there.
Sporting events to some extent, I guess. But.
Yeah, and I think sporting events, and again, getting
that's true.
But I think sporting events are like their own different thing. That's everybody on the same wave, right? That's everyone following the same current. A movie is everyone in the same kind of ethereal sort of thing, because anything can happen in a movie. It's what I love about it.
I want to kind of shift gears here and talk a little bit about Wally Kemp, because I know he's a big name in the history of this theater. Who was Wally Kemp?
Yeah, Wally was the manager of the Grand Theater and the Capitol Theater for, 50 years. I mean, up until, I believe, the mid-'80s. And he was just, sadly, I never got to meet him.
Do you know when he died?
Would have been the early 90s, I think.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
But yeah, he was just larger than life. I wish there was somebody here that could talk about him, because he insisted the children call him Uncle Wally when they saw him out on the sidewalk. We had a round table here about 10 years ago it was all former employees of Wally, and they just had some of the most amazing stories about just how charitable he was, and of course in the movies he would get up and he would, like, if it was a kids matinee, he would calm the children down, and then he would have everybody sing "God Bless America," and he was a showman.
Yeah. One of the things I remember seeing, and one of our shared friends, George Ayub, was in this photo of out here on the street, out in front of the Grand. He did a giant hula hoop contest at one point where he had like 200 kids hula hooping at once. I mean, that was the sort of thing he would do. Yeah,
and again, Jack Bailey's collection, there are lots of photographs of just wacky kind of like promotions they would do for different movies. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what some of them were.
They had I'm trying to think of the photographs downstairs. There's a Getting Gertie's Garter.
Yep,
There's that one where the 2 kids are chasing each other around the auditorium. There's one with a milk cow. I don't know what the movie was, but they had 2 guys, like the horse costume, but it was a cow, and they had like a milk machine set up in here. They had a race car. They had sword fights out front. It just went on and on and on. I've collected quite a few photographs over the years of different things that they've done. So.
Kind of speaking about the collection of photographs and the archival documentation that we have of this theater at our museum, but I'm kind of embarrassed to say I've never been here. I've lived in Grand Island about a year and a half now, and I haven't made it to the Grand Theater, regrettably so.
Well, you've had 1 or 2 things get in your way.
Yeah, maybe. But just looking around here now, it's really, really amazing. I know that's a really overused word, but it's kind of like walking into a museum itself.
You haven't even been to the theater yet.
No, I haven't.
Yeah.
Just in the walkway, the lobby is something to see. I'm noticing a few things just around me. What are some of the objects that you have on display here?
The lobby is very similar to what it was in 1937. I'm sitting in the concession stand right now. This was actually a storefront that went out to the street where the two restrooms were at. That was also a storefront. So on each side of the lobby, they had 3 poster cases there. And then on this side, there were also 3 poster cases. There was not a concession stand in 1937 because that was considered to be kind of a poor taste.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Huh.
So
Poor taste. No pun intended.
and let's see what else. Yeah. So if you look at the photographs from 1937, down in the lower lobby, there was like a mohair couch and a console radio. We got the radio a long time ago, but we still haven't been able to find just the perfect couch to set down there.
I think this one works really well. It looks kind of like The Shining, but in a good way. I mean that. It's like a teal with these, luminescent light. It's just very, very. It's like the bathroom scene in The Shining. There's those bright contrasting images.
When we took over, they actually had closed off the stairway going down. That was just like a lounge. They had this weird kind of a wicker set down there, and then there was a doorway that you could still get down there, but it wasn't open like it is now. Fortunately, they had saved the chrome railing and everything, and so we were able to bring that up when we opened up the basement again.
Is that an original Usher's uniform? Or?
No, that was a gentleman that used to come in every Saturday, and
a long-time volunteer.
Yeah. And sadly, he passed away. But his wife brought his costume in, so he used to wear.
What I think is cool about that, and why I'm kind of glad it's up, is it kind of shows. In my mind, it's representative of the connection that people in Grand Island have for the Grand. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's this guy spent the last 15 years of his life here every single Saturday. Mm-hmm. I mean, who does that?
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
someone who cares.
I point at you.
But no, there was actually a second set of doors where that beam is. So there was almost like a little mezzanine or an entry.
Are there any artifacts that the theater still possesses that are like original ticket stubs or a box of popcorn from 1938 or something?
In a bit, yeah.
Yeah, I think I've moved a lot of that stuff up into that. There's a showcase on the lower lobby there, and we don't have a lot. There's been some really nice people in the community that have donated some tickets, and I don't know what all's in there, but there's some pretty cool stuff. We've also got some pieces from the Capitol Theater that was a few blocks over. Some architectural type pieces, but
it looks like these are the original entry signs, like that say aisle 2 and aisle 1. Like those look very. I mean, maybe they're not, but they look period.
Yeah, the metal part is original. The inserts, Dawn Hesnault used to work at Maudie Stained Glass. She's the one that did the inserts, but she did a good job with them. So,
can you tell the story of so Wally Camp ran it through the 80s, pretty much, right?
Right,
somewhere in there, and then it was taken over by an actual Fridley. Was it? It was a Fridley Theater, mm-hmm. And then Fridley Theater was going to close it in 2003,
2004.
2004. Yeah. So can you tell that story real quick of how it turned into a volunteer-run nonprofit organization when it was a theater from 37 all the way through 2004? Yeah,
let me jump back to. So I think Wally, the mid-'80s were kind of a dark time for the Grand because it just was. I don't think Wally was that involved with it, and it was starting to get really kind of run down and everything. And then a couple of guys. Jay French and Juan Portillo took over the theater. They bought it, and they were going to show repertory film. And they did that for a while, but it just is. As we know, that just doesn't work very well. It
just doesn't work.
Yeah, as many times as you try.
We hear it all the time.
You mean showing older movies?
Yeah.
People say they want older movies, and then people don't come to older movies,
Right.
just over and over and over.
Yeah, it seems like a good idea, but it just, for whatever reason, doesn't work. They ran it for, I don't know, probably 2 or 3 years, and then Fridley took over, and they're the ones that moved the restrooms upstairs so they could be handicap accessible. Did a really nice job with the theater, and they ran it for 12 years.
Yeah,
is what she told me.
Melissa and that crew.
Yeah. And then at that time, there was this weird thing that happened. We had a 4-screen cinema at the mall. We had a twin cinema at the other mall. And then they opened up a 7-plex. Mm-hmm. So all of a sudden in Grand Island, Nebraska, there are 13 screens.
13 screens.
And so Fridley's, being a single screen theater, they just could not get new films from the studios. And so they wanted to donate the theater to a nonprofit organization. Grand Island Theater looked at it at the time, but the interesting thing about the Grand Theater is it was never a performing arts theater. It was always just a movie theater. And so there is no backstage. There are no dressing rooms. There's no fly or whatever, it just was movie theater. And so they weren't interested in it. About that time, and it was Monty Walters, got a meeting going with all downtown business people. And it was over at the coffee shop, whatever it was called.
Oh, yeah, it was Semino's at the time, right?
Yeah,
in 2004.
Yeah.
And then it was Blue Moon. And then
it was actually Blue Moon at the time.
Blue Moon,
yeah.
okay.
And anyway, we all sat down and started discussing options for taking over the theater. And what Fridley's wanted was they wanted to donate the building to a nonprofit, but they wanted, I think it was $25,000 for the equipment.
Yeah.
So the projector, the popcorn popper, everything else. And so we sat down and just talked about the logistics and everything. And as I am now, I didn't want to get involved, but one of a friend of mine that was sitting with me, he raised my hand, and I got stuck on a committee, and here I am.
Yeah.
15 years later, or however many years.
The part of that story that always amazes me is like the last step to getting a nonprofit, to getting a 501c3 status, usually takes a long time, and it got fast tracked by then State Senator Tom Osborne. Mm-hmm. Was that right? Or or Senator, not state, but
regular senator.
Regular Senator Tom Osborne. And wasn't there like less
Congressman?
than
He was never elected.
That's right. Wasn't there just like 24 hours to spare, like less than 24 hours?
Yeah, we had to do it.
Coming in?
Yeah, we had to do it really quick. Monty Walters knew Tom Osborne, and she personally had him get this thing on the fast track. It was right after 9/11.
Yeah.
So the government was really suspicious of new nonprofits, and so it was taking a long time back at that time.
And that is called constituent services.
Right, yeah. And so anyway, they got to push through. We signed the papers, got a really nice grant from the Kaufman Cummings organization that helped pay for the renovation.
Yep. And the long and short of it is we see a lot of these sort of theaters now, but the Grand was kind of the OG original nonprofit volunteer-run theater, and it remains that way. 15 years later?
Yeah.
I mean, that's not a small thing, man. 15 years of being a volunteer-run nonprofit theater.
Yeah.
What's the future of the Grand look like to both of you? Since you're both invested a lot into it.
Really hard to say right now because what's the future of movies?
Exactly, and that's kind of the larger question. I mean,
I hate to keep jumping in, but it's one of the things I heard that was really interesting about what's going on now is because James Bond has been over on the poster wall for 8 months now, right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of talk about that going straight to streaming. And the problem is that if it goes to streaming, how do you convince an audience then to watch the next James Bond movie in the theater? Can you do it? Can you take one movie, put it on streaming, and then have another one show up in the theater? And most people think the answer is no. And if the answer remains no, then this movie theater is going to continue to exist, I think, and other movie theaters. But if not, Who knows, man? I mean, what did Tenet make at the theater? 50 million?
Yeah, I don't think that was really fair though.
Yeah,
you know, because it was kind of a niche movie, and I don't. If things would have been normal, I don't know that it would have really done all that well.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think Universal, you know, they pushed the Trolls movie out on video and started this big confrontation between exhibition and distribution, and it wasn't pretty. And I just read something here not too long ago that it really didn't do all that well. And
they'd been saying it did really well, though, didn't it?
Yeah, but I don't think it. Basically, it wouldn't be enough. Like if they did James Bond, it wouldn't cover the cost of the movie, and so they are realizing that exhibition is a huge part of the business model. So I don't know. I'm pretty optimistic. I think that once we come up with a cure or a decent treatment for this thing, I think it's going to come back with a vengeance. I think people are so, you know, once they start putting out some of these movies that, I mean, look at the entire summer got pushed
all of it
to 2021, and you know
we're going to have blockbuster movies lined up,
yeah,
waiting to
it's
land.
Gonna be,
you know,
it's going to be big, and
production hasn't really stopped either. That's the crazy thing. I know a bunch of productions that are happening. Right now.
I know.
Has that slowed down at all? I feel like a lot of stuff got pushed back.
It stopped for a while.
It did for a while, yeah.
And now it's back up and running.
Yep.
And I know that.
I'd like to know the status of the next Indiana Jones movie and whether or not Harrison Ford's going to still be alive by the time I get to see it. That's my main priority. No, I think that this, you know, what we're talking about is kind of the reality for a lot of industries as well, not just movie theaters. I mean, you know, you start with a single screen movie house that's very successful, and then 50 years later, the next innovation, you know, the multiplex, big, you know, multiple screen theater system comes into towns all across America, and it threatens the single house movie theater, much just like the mom and pop stores, and the mall moves into town and it starts hurting the mom and pop stores. And then now here we are again with Amazon and online sales and things hurting the malls and the you know, big box stores. And it's the same thing with movie theaters that are, you know, these big box stores. And now things like what's the movie that just came out with De Niro and Pacino and the Irishman.
Oh yeah, the Irishman.
Or you know, like things like that. I think we're at the beginning of seeing a lot of these movies go straight to Netflix, maybe, or at least be in competition with the big box.
Yeah.
I think,
like multiple theater systems.
I think one of the things that concerns me, maybe more than anything, is just the grand. We are what they call sub run or second run, and so like basically the movies that we show every Friday, Saturday, Sunday are the movies that they've left the AMC here in town, but they're not on video yet. It concerns me because was it AMC and Universal struck some kind of a deal where it was like a 21-day window or something.
That window was wicked short.
That's getting to be, because typically I think it's like 90 days. That concerns me, I think, just about as much as anything, because that kind of cuts us out. You know, I mean, and as Mike has pointed out, we have shown things that have been on VOD and done well with them. So, you know, I that's the kind of stuff I don't try not to think about too much, because it could make you crazy. But
yeah. Well, let me throw one other thing too, is that the Grand Board took when it was the Fridley Theater, renovated it back to what it was in the closer to 1937, right? And what was that process like? And what did you do?
So in 2010, so we ran with 35 millimeter film for about 5 years, and then everything was switching over to digital. And Bill Barstow, who books our movies, has some theaters in Omaha. I discussed it with him, and at the time it was, you know, to switch over to digital, it was like either do it now or do it later, because 35 millimeter film
it's happening. Yeah,
was going out, and he said you can either jump in and be one of the first ones to do it, or you can wait and play catch up. And so we decided, you know, we'd been very successful for the first 5 years. So we had, some money in the bank and everything. So we converted over to digital. Had a few people, well, how dare you, in this 1937 movie palace, how dare you get rid of film? And it's like, well, it's been wonderful because it has opened up so many possibilities for playing video games. We had a Nebraska made film festival for a few years. There's you can do anything, anything that's on digital, on anything, any video, pretty much you can put up on screen. Yeah. That part of it's been wonderful. And then the other half of that's when we redid the facade and we changed out the sign, moved the ticket booth back into the center like it was in 1937. Prior to that, it had been off to the east side of the entry. But
I mean, you guys researched all the way down to like the type of stone that's on the wall out there.
Yeah, you can't.
I forget what it's called. It's like
vitrolite.
Vitrolite, that's right.
Yeah. Okay. So the Grand originally had vitrolite on the front of it. You can still get vitrolite, but you couldn't get that much. And so we ended up going with this tile that each one of those sections. Do you remember, Mike? How much are they like? Were they like $250, $150?
Yeah, each one was up there. It was a bigger project for us.
How many tiles was it? Of 250 a pop?
I don't.
Few dozen,
a
few
hundred.
Okay.
Wasn't it?
What was it?
Like a couple hundred, like 200 or so. I don't know. I don't know.
And then we redid the sign and we went with neon again because, especially in 2010, there was not a suitable LED replacement for neon. And so there's, I think, 970 feet of neon on that sign. And it's wonderful. I just love it. Yeah.
I do think that places like this just offer an experience that a large movie theater complex doesn't really offer. I know that like the prices are cheaper and people appreciate that, but I think you have an experience here in a way that you don't at just a huge movie theater. It's kind of like checking into an airport almost. There's people everywhere. There's lines everywhere. There are, an infinite direction that people are moving in. But like this is like the theater, and the only place everyone is going is right here. And I think that there's something to be said for that. And I do think it's a different experience overall.
When you're sitting in there, and of course my perspective is completely different now because I'm the projectionist, and Melissa did tell me. Yeah. She did tell me, she said, I'm going to warn you, this is going to change your perspective of going to a movie. And she wasn't wrong. It's a little bit like finding out how a magic trick is done. And,
I can see that. You don't really want to know how the sausage is made.
Yeah.
But for sure, prior to 2005, I would, when you go see a movie and you'd be sitting in there and, all of a sudden that curtain starts going up.
Yeah.
And it's just so magical. It's compared to, anything else. And yes, we don't have recliners and we don't have food service and, some of the bar service, whatever, that some of the big theaters have.
But I think that's good. I'm from Lincoln, and all they have are the Marcus theaters, and they, ironically, they have the Grand Theater in Lincoln, and it's, however many theaters it is, 12 or 13 or whatever. But like, there's ads that are running before the movie, and like, I don't want to see commercials for, whatever before the movie, and then the guy who owns the company, who's never worked a day in his life, gets on there and is like, oh, thank you for choosing our family run business. Really? Because I had no choice, because you have a monopoly on our town. And it's just like that whole thing, it just puts a sour taste in your mouth. Whereas this, I feel like you're just still that kind of starstruck kid of like, I'm going to the movies. And I appreciate that.
Yeah. I've always been about the experience. I want it to be the best possible experience that I can make it. And as a moviegoer, all those things that annoy me, like the ads before the movie, it's like, we're not doing that here. And yes, I know we're leaving money on the table, but I don't know. It annoys me to no end when you pay admission to go in someplace and then have to sit through a Coke commercial. I mean, it just irritates me. So
and
that's
19
one thing.
trailers.
Yeah.
There used to be 2 trailers than the movie, not 13.
Right.
I don't know. I have a lot of...
And you know what? That messes people up, too.
It does.
Because people are so used to having, 20, 25 minutes worth of previews. And they come here and, they walk in 15 minutes late and the movie's already been going for 10 minutes. Yeah, because I do 2 trailers. And then, any other promotions that we're doing. But
So the all-important question, just to kind of sum things up, 1937 to 1986, I think, was the original, before any renovations happened. A lot of movies took place during that time. Is there any one in particular, living or otherwise, that you would have liked to have seen that you didn't get a chance to see on opening night at the Grand?
One of my favorite photos I think ever that I've seen is someone took a picture of the chestburster scene from Alien. Right, the first time that had happened, and it's of the audience, and they focused on, I think, like 12 people, and 11 of them are recoiling in horror, and one guy's just sitting there with a big old grin on his face. I want to be that guy, that would be my.
Here's a fun thing: I saw Alien here
in
this theater. I can tell you right where I sat. Yeah,
that would be the best.
The one I'm gonna pick is kind of different, and not that this is like my favorite movie or even that I am even really that interested in it, but my dad told me that when he went to see The Exorcist right when it came out in theaters, that people were just so freaked out and messed up by it, but like the lines were just huge, and it was this thing that everyone had to see. So I'm more interested to like be in the line, like, and then see people coming out and just gauging their reactions of The Exorcist right when it came out, because I feel like we now live in a world where there like is nothing that could freak people out in terms of a film that's an hour and 40 minutes or whatever. So just to still like see people in an age of the possibility of being, had their hair blown back a little bit would have been something to see.
That would be cool. You got one, Jim?
I don't really. Mine goes back to more like the experiences I've had here in this theater. I remember being a big Star Trek nerd. My parents brought me to see Star Trek the motion picture in 1978, and if you've watched it, there's an overture prior to the movie starting, and I can just remember we were sitting in the auditorium, and the lights go out, and they had hung a mirrored disco ball from the middle of the ceiling, and then they shine these lights in the middle of it, and it blew all these stars around in the auditorium, and I still remember that. I mean, it was just, I was so excited because you hadn't seen these characters on screen for 10 years, whatever, and
then you get to see them for a full year in that movie.
Exactly.
That's a long movie, man. Not to
But,
crap on your experience, because that's an awesome story, but man, that movie's long.
But that's I don't know if I suppose some of the classics like Gone with the Wind would have been pretty amazing to see back.
The Wizard of Oz when color.
Yeah, I was just thinking.
Yeah, that first color.
Was that a moment that people were like, "Whoa, geez, there's color"?
A lot of people.
It must have been. Yeah.
There's always those stories you hear too of people being unprepared for what they see, like King Kong. It's been disproven, but I always heard that the people ran screaming from the theater because they thought there was a giant monkey somewhere. It's like that's not true, but I would always love to see something that people had never seen before like that. That would be the best.
And there's got to be an evolution there that goes all the way back to War of the Worlds over the radio.
Mm-hmm.
But where does that point end? Because I think that it did end in very recent memory, maybe.
Yeah, we may have seen it all.
Yeah. Unfortunately, and I don't think that's a good thing.
Note to end on.
Yeah. Maybe there's something yet to come. How about that?
Well, and getting back to the future of the Grand.
Back to the Future.
We are planning on. I'm not going to make any announcements right now, but we are going to be doing some improvements in the auditorium as far as like the sound and few other things that should be pretty exciting. I wish more than anything we could be doing it right now while we're closed. But I don't think that's going to happen. But it'll be exciting. It'll be something to look forward to.
Well, that's good. I think we're all looking forward to it.
Cool.
Okay, and that will conclude episode 3 of season 3 of the Stuhr Crazy Podcast. Join us again next week when we will be talking about the Julius Leszczynski collection live from inside the photo archives of the Stuhr Museum.
Yeah, we're going to move from moving pictures to still pictures, but I'll tell you what, the thing I love about what we're going to be talking about is that Stuhr Museum has an amazing collection of photographs. I mean, one of those things that museums twice our size, 3 times our size would be lucky to have.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a vast collection of glass plate images, and a whole host of albums and scrapbooks and just photos galore. And it's really truly a treasure trove and one of my favorite parts of the entire museum collection as a curator here. It'll be a really great episode, so I hope you join us, and we'll see you in a week.
All right, thanks for listening.